Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Transforming Libraries for Graduate Students webinar series. My name is Elaine Walker, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I recently transitioned to a new job as a scholarly communications librarian here at the University of Alabama. But before that, I was the graduate studies librarian at a small college in Mississippi called Mississippi University for Women, which is where I first became involved with this conference, first as a presenter, then serving on the conference planning committee, and now the webinar series. So a little bit more about TLGS. It's a biennial conference hosted by East Tennessee State University, dedicated to graduate librarianship. Established in 2016, it provides a space for sharing innovative ideas and best practices for supporting graduate faculty and students in higher ed. This webinar series is a way to keep our community of graduate librarians connected and engaged in the off year, because we all know a lot can happen in a year. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker today, Brooke Gross, who is joining us from J.D. Williams Library in Oxford, Mississippi. Brooke received her MS in Information Sciences from the University of Tennessee. She started out as an assistant librarian at Holmes Community College and now serves as the research and instruction librarian and assistant professor at the University of Mississippi. She specializes in critical thinking and information literacy instruction, with a particular focus on online teaching and learning opportunities, which we'll hear more about today. So Brooke, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you still hear me okay? That still works?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Again, repeating some of this information. My name is Brooke Gross. I'm here at the University of Mississippi. Some of this will be repeated a little bit later in my presentation, but thank you all so much for having me and welcome. I'm actually going to be turning off my video for the bulk of this presentation just because I'm in my little study carrel, and so trying to minimize technology mishaps. Additionally, in the interest of full transparency, I do have some notes that I'll be looking at for time management purposes. When I'm nervous, I tend to talk a little bit fast, so I'm going to try really hard not to just blow through all of this. If you hear kind of a prolonged silence, that's just me reminding myself to take a deep breath and drink some water. So with that, I want to thank Transforming Libraries for Graduate Students for having me. I'm so excited to be part of this webinar series. I also want to thank you all for being here live and everyone who winds up watching this recording later. Today, I'm going to talk about a retrospective approach to critical thinking instruction for graduate students, focusing on unique challenges that graduate students face in today's academic and information environments. I'll discuss some ideas for how to address those challenges reactively, as well as strategies for building more proactive critical thinking instruction for graduate students in the future. Here's my agenda in a little bit more detail. I'll start with some background information on myself and my institution, taking a quick glance at our stats related to graduate and undergraduate students in the last year. I'll also explain our approach to library instruction as a whole, as well as the experiences I've had with graduate students in particular, in order to frame the rest of this presentation. I'll go over a few key resources related to critical thinking and information literacy within the field of information sciences to ground us in the bigger picture of this topic. Then I'll move into information literacy challenges that significantly impact the graduate student experience, followed by a more detailed look at graduate student needs and possible solutions that librarians can provide. I'll end by examining 4 ways in which library instruction can be better tailored to graduate students moving forward, and then hopefully we'll have time for a few questions. Like I said, we'll start with context. First, I'll repeat just a little bit of information about where I'm coming from, since the majority of my presentation is based on my experiences working with different types of students. My current home base is the University of Mississippi Libraries. I received my Master of Science in Information Sciences from the University of Tennessee in December 2020, so I'm still fairly new to the profession. I was the assistant librarian at Holmes Community College in Grenada, Mississippi from January to September of 2021. I've been with the Research and Instruction Department at the University of Mississippi for a little over a year now. I was initially the liaison to political science, public policy leadership, social work, and journalism. Recently, some of our areas and responsibilities have shifted, so now I'm working with the School of Education and the Honors College. My job duties include providing library instruction sessions, hosting one-on-one research consultations virtually and in person, designing workshops, conducting research of my own, and doing presentations like this one. Over the last 2 semesters, I've been particularly focused on critical thinking and information literacy instruction, as well as online learning materials. Now, about our Ole Miss libraries. We have a standard, robust, heavily emphasized first-year instruction program led by our Research and Instruction Department. We see introductory classes from the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, Student Success Center, and Honors College every semester. It's been that way for quite some time now. The scheduling and format of these sessions usually remain the same from year to year. These classes consist mostly of freshmen and transfers, along with students facing or returning from academic probation. This year, the number of librarians teaching those first-year classes has been reduced by 2 as a result of our new Scholar Support and Data Services Department. That department was formed over the summer to address emerging digital humanities, scholarly publishing, and data literacy needs. The new department intends to have a greater focus on specialized and graduate student services utilizing emerging technologies. To give you an idea of what our service breakdown has looked like recently, I've included a snapshot of how many undergraduate and graduate students our librarians served in the last year. I'll dig deeper into those numbers on the next slide. So this is a rough overview of how many graduate and undergraduate students the University of Mississippi Libraries served or met with through events, classes, and consults from August of last year through this October. Events consist mostly of orientations, workshops, and tours. They may be geared toward a particular community group, but aren't strictly affiliated with any class. They tend to be most popular with graduate students, but our undergraduate instructors do sometimes utilize them as extra credit opportunities. This semester in particular, both the Research and Instruction and Scholar Support and Data Services departments have been providing more workshops, and this is likely to continue in the spring. Instruction sessions are tied to a particular course, but may follow different formats depending on the request. Our librarians typically receive instruction requests from the departments they liaise to on an individual basis. Liaisons reach out to faculty and schedule sessions on their own, whether those take place in the library classrooms or other parts of campus. The exception to this is first-year instruction sessions, which are typically scheduled and distributed among research and instruction librarians by the department supervisor. As you can see, those classes make up about 75% of our undergraduate instruction, which significantly exceeds our graduate instruction. Again, those classes include introductory writing, honors, and student success courses. Research consultations are one-on-one meetings requested by individual students or faculty for help with a specific assignment or project. This is where we see the greatest balance between undergraduates and graduates served. Some librarians emphasize research consultations, whether in person or over Zoom, while others have a heavier instruction load. It depends on faculty and student preferences, which vary by department. These numbers paint a relatively clear picture of our current teaching and learning philosophy at the University of Mississippi. Our strategy thus far has been to reach students early when they're just starting their academic career and hope that they either retain that information or at least remember that we're here to help them throughout the rest of their educational journey. Undergraduate students are our top priority when it comes to traditional in-person instruction. Some may even see us up to 3 times in their first 2 years of school, but graduate students are mostly supported through supplementary orientations and consultations or specialized workshops. That being said, our priorities have started to shift a bit, and I do want to mention the limitations of these stats as you're seeing them at this moment. This is only a snapshot taken from the last calendar year, roughly, and there are a few missing pieces. These numbers are rough estimates. Each librarian enters their own data, which they can do at any point during the semester, and they can choose how much or little detail to include. For example, the data included in these slides does not include workshops conducted by the new Scholar Support and Data Services Department or instruction statistics from our recently hired science librarian. Additionally, we introduced a new library skills and orientation course available online for both undergraduate and graduate students this fall, but we're still trying to figure out the best way to track its use. This is a breakdown of what we typically focus on when it comes to instruction. For students in the first year instruction program, our main goal is to teach them how to use the library website and perform basic searches. We also touch on key library services and tasks, such as printing or finding a physical book in our stacks. This is done in an in-person library session with a standardized handout, which is taught in pretty much the same way by all of our research and instruction librarians. Essentially, we want to introduce the library and the research process. Writing and honors classes may receive more in-depth research content based on instructor requests and librarian recommendations. Library sessions for subject-specific classes, both undergraduate and graduate, are typically centered around disciplinary resources and advanced research strategies. This is where students get into primary sources, specialized databases and journals, subject-specific research methods, citation tracing, things like that. In every session, from first year instruction to graduate courses, we're encouraged to incorporate critical thinking. This quote comes from the University of Mississippi's Quality Enhancement Plan, Think Forward, which emphasizes the importance of building critical thinking into undergraduate instruction in particular. The university's official approach to critical thinking is as a discipline-specific skill. What does it mean to think critically in biology? What does critical thinking look like for political scientists? What do future humanists need to know about critical thinking? So faculty are encouraged to teach from that point of view. In the library, since we typically only see students once per semester, we tend to look at critical thinking as a fundamental information literacy skill. We try to teach our students how to utilize the information skills they learn in the library, both inside and outside the classroom. The last things I want to talk about before diving into the meat of my presentation are some specific experiences I've had working with graduate students. I've spent some time outlining our library instruction approaches for undergraduate students because I wanted to get y'all thinking about what undergraduate student needs traditionally are and how some libraries address them. But these scenarios I'm about to go over come from graduate students and classes specifically. When a graduate level instructor reaches out to me about coming to visit their class, they usually want me to go over research services and resources offered by the library. They want their students to get an in-depth look at what's available to them, particularly subject-specific databases and services such as research consults or interlibrary loan. Students usually already have an assignment that they're either starting soon or working on currently. So instructors like to build in some workshop time too, to give students a chance to ask me questions about their unique topics. During this time, I often receive questions about citation tracing techniques and citation management software such as Zotero. But I also get questions about OneSearch, our library's primary discovery system. We tell undergraduate students to use OneSearch almost exclusively because it pulls results from almost all of our databases, journals, and collections. But graduate students in my classes aren't always aware of it. They're also not always aware of basic search techniques. I've been asked to demonstrate and explain Boolean operators, quotation marks, asterisks, even filters and limiters. In some cases, I have to circle back to keyword searching and narrowing down topics, pulling slides from my undergraduate presentations for my graduate library sessions. These gaps in knowledge have been even more prevalent in my research consultations. I've had many graduate students across all the disciplines I've worked with, social work, journalism, political science, public policy leadership, and education, who were typing their entire research question or assignment prompt into the search bar. Or they come in having exhausted all the literature in one single subject database, knowing nothing about our discovery systems that allow them to search in several different places at once. Both of these habits result in far fewer research hits and a far more frustrating research process, which I can see in their works in progress and when I meet with them. So these are some of the experiences that have framed my talk today. Basically, I'm asking, what if graduate student needs aren't so different from undergraduates? Graduate students have many unique experiences that necessitate different research and instruction approaches because they are doing advanced research. But I'm going to argue that there's also a fundamental need to support or even rebuild these students' foundational information skills. In my mind, critical thinking encompasses many of these basic information and technology skills. In the last decade, critical thinking instruction has become a larger priority across the field of information sciences. Librarians are being asked to help students comprehend not only how to find information, but also how to use and communicate it effectively. This is part of what's informing new library instruction initiatives, and there's a strong professional precedent for that. I'm just listing a few standard documents from ACRL that highlight the importance of critical thinking and information literacy, as well as some recent articles that demonstrate how different libraries and organizations are interpreting these concepts. The framework outlines 6 key information literacy concepts that higher education libraries and information professionals should be focused on. When I teach critical thinking and information literacy, I'm mostly thinking about frames 1, 4, and 6. Frame 1, authority is constructed and contextual, emphasizes the role of the creator or distributor in spreading credible knowledge. This provides an opportunity for me to talk about publisher or author reputation when it comes to evaluating sources both inside and outside the classroom. Frame 4, research as inquiry, speaks to the complexity and interconnectedness of the research process. I talk about this with graduate students when I cover citation tracing and interdisciplinary searching. Frame 6, searching as strategic exploration, notes the mental stamina and flexibility required to conduct research successfully. On a basic level, I encourage students to try different search strings and switch up their keywords, keeping an open mind about their topic. The other ACRL documents represent a continued push toward critical thinking and information literacy instruction, asking librarians to view their profession as connecting to the broader information landscape rather than being siloed in academia. The other 3 sources I've listed provide some examples of how librarians are implementing critical thinking initiatives. The last 2 presidential elections and COVID-19 pandemic have brought fake news to the forefront of everyone's minds. So many librarians are using that as a foundation for information literacy instruction. I actually put together a library exhibit this past spring that showcased methods for identifying and avoiding fake news based on one of the library sessions we were teaching. This first article from Matthew Sullivan talks about some of the discrepancies between misinformation, disinformation, and fake news instruction across libraries. It also outlines some possible approaches for addressing these topics moving forward. Because information is available in so many different formats now, digital and technology literacy tie into that as well. The Constantino article talks about how online learning initiatives have not only changed the way we deliver information literacy instruction, but also emphasized gaps in digital literacy. So now librarians have to think about how we teach in addition to what we teach. These are skill sets that will serve students beyond academia, so conversations about critical thinking instruction are also leading to conversations about lifelong learning. Mitchell Peters outlines the benefits of online or hybridized learning opportunities when it comes to teaching lifelong skills, because it blends formal and informal learning environments, which can help students more easily adapt to the workforce beyond their education. We want to send our students away with information habits that they can use outside the carefully structured educational environment. I think that's especially important for graduate students. You may have noticed that I'm using the terms critical thinking and information literacy either together or interchangeably. This just comes from my own approach to these topics. I teach information literacy as the ability to find, access, evaluate, use, and communicate information effectively. When I teach critical thinking, I teach it as an interrelated component of information literacy, particularly referring to how we absorb and analyze information in order to solve problems and express solutions. In the future, I'd like to explore contrasting definitions and the language or context surrounding these terms, but that'll be an entirely different presentation. For now, I'm going to talk about the applications and expectations of these connected skills as they relate to graduate students on a broader scale. Information literacy has many applications in academia. I'm sure all of these will look familiar to y'all. Graduate students will use these types of skills to conduct advanced research using a variety of materials, interpreting information from both primary and secondary sources, which they may have to hunt down using different search techniques. In many cases, they'll also be expected to publish research of their own or present at conferences. They have to understand how to effectively communicate their findings and incorporate others ethically. Lastly, some graduate students teach, whether that's running an undergraduate course single-handedly or serving as a teaching assistant. This can be an entirely different kind of test for their information literacy skills, particularly expanding on that effective communication piece. In a nutshell, graduate students are expected to produce scholarly research and provide meaningful service to their organization. When I was a graduate student, I thought of myself as like a baby professional, and I think that's the kind of environment that many graduate professors try to create. Graduate students also face many expectations outside the realm of education, then, and maybe even alongside it if they're completing their advanced degree while holding another job. They'll have to interpret different kinds of information, from deciding which jobs to apply for and evaluating those qualifications to analyzing reports for their company. Even work emails can require some mental strain. Information literacy skills also come into play when performing routine tasks. Think about following instructions with different levels of detail or background information provided. News literacy obviously plays a role in the real world too, whether you're sending out a department memo on behalf of an administrator or reading the company newsletter. Graduate students are expected to enter the workforce as competent employees capable of engaging with and utilizing different kinds of communication effectively. These are the criteria for success. So what are the barriers? What gets in the way of being successful in these areas? In academia, the quality of your research may depend on your familiarity with your institution. You need to know what your library has to offer if you want to use its resources to their fullest extent. And that means you have to know how to use the library website. Learning any new technology takes time, and graduate students starting at a new university may struggle to pick up on unfamiliar software or website design. Similarly, graduate students come with a wide range of experiences when it comes to scholarly publishing. Some may be fresh out of undergrad, where they regularly produce literature reviews or annotated bibliographies. Others may be returning after several years, where they weren't interacting with current literature or academia at all. So they're trying to readjust to those ways of thinking with no awareness of current trends. For graduate students that are teaching, some institutions have robust academic outreach centers for instructional support. Classes taught by the Department of Writing and Rhetoric and Student Success Center at the University of Mississippi, for example, come with predetermined assignments and ready-made teaching materials. Some graduate students may not have that structural support, though, so it's a new experience for them that adds additional stress to their other academic requirements. While we can easily determine a kind of formula for graduate success, as shown on the previous slide, we have to consider how those experiences are affected by graduate students' comfort within their institution and library. Challenges that graduate students experience in the workforce are slightly different, but still directly connected to critical thinking and information literacy. Interpreting any kind of information requires some knowledge of what credible sources look like, and the criteria for credibility can vary depending on the environment. Evaluating an article in a scholarly journal is different from evaluating a social media post or phishing email. Instructions and expectations that you're given in the workforce may also come in a variety of formats, and graduate students may have to engage in problem-solving techniques that didn't apply to their academic research. This could include interpreting messy handwriting, working in a team with differing personalities and opinions, or translating jargon. Lastly, something I'm particularly passionate about related to information literacy and critical thinking instruction is good digital citizenship, which applies both inside and outside the workforce. At some point, every single graduate student will be considered an expert or reliable information source in some way, whether by their colleagues, followers on social media, or friends and family. Therefore, they'll have a responsibility to ensure that they're not spreading misinformation or otherwise contaminating the information environments they contribute to. Many of the information literacy skills that graduate students gain in academia will also be necessary for the real world. The trick is knowing how to adapt those thought processes. Looking at the expectations and challenges graduate students face both during and after their educational experience gives us a glimpse of their needs and how librarians might address them. Before I can dig into that, though, I want to make a point of mentioning that any solutions libraries can offer graduate students at this point are coming in at the home stretch of their education. That's where the retrospective part of my presentation comes in. Not only do we have to think about identifying graduate student needs, but also meeting those needs without devaluing the information skills and practices they already have. How do we teach a fundamental skill like critical thinking when their foundation for interacting with information has already been built? We start by assessing some of the things graduate students are missing when they're conducting research and engaging with information. I've touched on these a little bit, but now I'm going to dig into some more specific issues. First, there's a gap in prior instruction that librarians have to address. Critical thinking and information literacy aren't necessarily new topics, just as we tell our students at Ole Miss that fake news isn't a new problem, but their adoption and prioritization in library instruction hasn't really picked up until recently. Additionally, as some of the articles I reviewed earlier demonstrate, there's still some inconsistency with how those concepts are taught. Therefore, that type of instruction may not have been included in library sessions that graduate students attended prior to beginning their advanced degrees, or it might have been different from your library's approach. If their discipline differs from their undergraduate major, they may not have been introduced to industry-specific research methods or resources either. I mentioned toward the beginning of my presentation that a problem I see with lots of graduate students is that they're only looking in one subject-specific database. But that can also go the other way around if they need specialized resources like data sets or photographs, but don't know that those dedicated databases exist. They may not know the language or jargon associated with their field either, which can add another layer of difficulty when interpreting and using research resources. Second, graduate students come from different backgrounds. I've already said this a few times, but bear with me because there are two skills I want to highlight in this area. First, keyword searching. This, by and large, is an academic skill. If you haven't had a library session or done research in the past, the extent of your online search experiences could be typing questions into Google, like, how long does cheese stay good in the fridge? Or how do you impress interviewers? For popular sources, that works. So, of course, some graduate students are going to apply the same strategies to researching in library databases. Chiseling down a research question to identify and search key topic elements significantly streamlines results, but that's not necessarily obvious when you're using a library search bar that looks a lot like Google. Then again, maybe your institution's discovery system looks nothing like Google. That can present an entirely different set of issues. Using one particular library's website also becomes a specialized skill, and graduate students may expect a similar navigation experience across all institutions. If you don't find something where you think it should be and where it's always been in your previous experience, it's easy to believe that it just doesn't exist. Lastly, I'm going to talk about gaps in current knowledge. The two other missing pieces I've discussed are particularly relevant for graduate students returning to academia after taking time off or entering a new field. However, there can be gaps in knowledge that have nothing to do with either of those factors. Graduate students are human, which means they're susceptible to the same memory pitfalls as undergraduates. Even if you had 3 or more library sessions in your first 2 years of college, you may forget everything you learned by the time you get to upper level or graduate research. Additionally, information trends and technologies are constantly evolving, so best practices can change. Graduate students are up and coming professionals, so current literature might not be on their radar yet. Now let's talk solutions. One way to bridge gaps in prior instruction is to build on prior experience. Every graduate student got to us, and this point in their education, somehow. If they're working on a research project that's already in progress, it's worth asking how they currently find resources and what has been successful for them thus far. Then we can build on existing thought processes instead of making them start their project over. This could be as simple as teaching them to take terminology from articles they've already found and use that to inform new keyword searches, or reviewing research methods and sources specific to their field. Then we can dig deeper into their existing resources and show them what makes that information credible and or relevant to their research, so they know what to look for in the future. They've probably already picked up some quality assurance measures instinctively. We just need to make them aware of those thought processes. This is also a great time to remind graduate students that research is supposed to be flexible and messy, so it's okay if they're struggling or didn't necessarily get a great start. This can be comforting validation for students feeling the pressure of those academic expectations that we discussed earlier. Additionally, I always remind students about cross-disciplinary discovery systems. At the University of Mississippi, we use OneSearch, which pulls results from almost all of our physical and electronic collections. Some students may have had good experiences with one particular database in the past, so that's all they want to use. but introducing them to search systems that pull from multiple sources can expand their results and potentially broaden their understanding of their topic. Gaps in background experience can actually be pretty easy to fix, particularly during one-on-one consultations or smaller classes. But it can also be tedious and time-consuming. If a student needs help building basic technology skills and learning best research practices, such as Boolean operators and other keyword search strategies, librarians may feel rushed to cover everything effectively. In larger classes, it can be especially difficult to balance teaching graduate students who know how the university systems work with those who need slower or more in-depth instruction. You can't teach everything and the kitchen sink at once. Librarians have always struggled with time constraints, even in traditional one-shot sessions, because the sheer amount of information students need is vast and growing. For graduate students in particular, there will be a need to cover advanced and discipline-specific research concepts, regardless of how much or little foundation they have. One way to combat this is to develop easily accessible supplementary materials that can be distributed to students without direct librarian oversight. Examples may include handouts on developing keyword searches, diagrams or tutorials explaining different parts of the library website, and brief recorded lectures reviewing basic and advanced search strategies. Anything that graduate students can review on their own and at their time of need can help streamline library instruction. Nobody likes homework, but graduate students may be more motivated to take advantage of DIY learning materials in order to work around their busy schedules and enhance their research. The trickiest things to maneuver from a customer service standpoint are gaps in current knowledge. Because librarians are so familiar with information literacy and research concepts, some things may feel like common sense to us, even if they're brand new to students. Narrowing in on those missing pieces is necessary, but it's important not to make graduate students feel stupid or ill-prepared in the process. Asking how someone missed a library session in undergrad or why they don't keep up with the literature in their field isn't helpful. What librarians can do, however, is treat these gaps as miniature blank slates. As I've said before, we never want to imply that a graduate student should start their entire research project over when they come to us with a work in progress. However, when it comes to individual skills and concepts that they haven't yet cultivated on their own, we can be more intentional and assertive with how we fill those gaps. We know what best practices are, so we can use these opportunities to help students build a better research foundation where they haven't yet developed their own habits. We can be the ones who introduce them to trending topics, placing an emphasis on the professional skill sets that they'll need later in the process. That's how we can fit in the real-world workforce readiness piece as well. By focusing on what graduate students can still learn rather than what they don't know, librarians can use their expertise as information professionals to control the introduction of certain concepts without drawing attention to what some may perceive as failure on the student's part. All of these solutions involve working backwards to establish new skills and competencies alongside existing thought processes. But what can we do to proactively improve graduate student library instruction moving forward? This last part of my presentation will focus on developing better teaching and learning opportunities that can improve critical thinking across all student groups. New instruction initiatives that aim to help students build a more solid information foundation, which they can take to graduate school and beyond, should adapt to multiple learning environments. They should be dual purpose, incorporating real-world skills such as information literacy and critical thinking, as well as basic library or research competencies. Focusing on specific assignments may be necessary for introductory library sessions, or in cases where an instructor's expectations demand certain skills or knowledge. But librarians should still seek out opportunities to demonstrate the usability of research skills throughout academia whenever possible. This could be as simple as a verbal reminder during the session or handout that graduate students can study on their own later. Additionally, instructional materials should be available in multiple different formats, so students who miss one learning opportunity can still access that content. Not all graduate students can attend in-person workshops or even virtual presentations, but that doesn't mean they're not interested. Supplementary materials can also be dual purpose as a makeup option for undergraduates in dedicated classes and a refresher for graduate students struggling with one or more of the gaps we just talked about. Instruction that is needed, successful, or popular should also be consistent and repetitive. Librarians should collaborate with each other to establish procedures for identifying researcher needs, regardless of what type of student they're helping, and develop workshops or other learning opportunities to address common concerns at their institution. Our liaison group at the University of Mississippi actually met yesterday to start talking about which workshops were successful, timing or content-wise, and how we can collaborate to reach more people in future semesters. Workshops that have high attendance and or positive feedback should be offered regularly throughout the semester, giving students as many chances as possible to learn that content. This can be tedious for librarians, giving the same spiel over and over, especially when administration is pushing new strategic initiatives at the same time. Utilizing student workers and pre-recorded components may be helpful here. Standardized or plug-and-play instruction with set slides and dedicated training can make delivery less effortful for librarians who also want to pursue other teaching and learning options. Finding a balance between evolving library objectives and traditional instruction methods can be challenging, but we can't afford to sacrifice basic student needs, and those will vary by institution. And with that, I have said a whole lot of words in not a lot of time. So to briefly summarize, there are no guarantees when it comes to graduate students, and we can't assume the same level of knowledge from student to student based solely on their academic level, especially with regards to university-specific technology skills or new competencies such as critical thinking. Librarians should be open to the idea that they may have to reteach some basic research and information concepts in order to properly set graduate students up for success. We can do this by taking a retrospective approach, using real-world examples to build career skills while taking their existing experiences and thought processes into consideration. Graduate students come in with a wealth of knowledge and experience, even if it's not the kind or caliber librarians would expect. So it's important to incorporate new concepts where needed, but utilize the foundation that's already there if able. Thank you all so much for listening. I don't remember if I remembered to say this at the beginning, but this is my contact information. I think this presentation will be available as well, but I'll keep this up during the Q&A portion if y'all want to get in touch with me about any of this.
Thank you, Brooke. That was excellent. I'll give you guys a minute if you want to raise your hand and ask a question or type it in the chat and I'll read it for the sake of the recording. Brooke, I did have a question. What would you say what was your most successful approach towards an instruction session? Like what did you or maybe one of your colleagues do that just resulted in higher engagement or really positive feedback? Yeah, I just wanted you to talk more about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, so we actually had a pretty successful session in the spring and then this past fall. It was part of our first year instruction kind of program. There was a variety of different ages there. The class was for ADHE 202, Fundamentals of Active Learning, and that included students who had been on academic probation and were kind of vying for readmission into the university. So we tailored that whole class around information literacy and critical thinking with the idea that, students could take these skills and apply them outside of class. So, hey, we can teach you more than just what to use for an assignment. And the way that we structured that session, we talked about credibility, we talked about misinformation and disinformation, we talked about fake news and media bias, all that good stuff. And we actually broke it up in the middle with an activity. The activity that we did asked students to read a popular news article and then basically tell us what were the red flags. So what stood out to them as this is a trustworthy source, this is not a trustworthy source, kind of trying to embed news literacy into it a little bit. And having that in the middle was great. We had students kind of discuss with us what they saw, what they didn't see. We didn't give them a list of bad things to look for, but the articles that we picked had kind of some sketchy looking things, but also some legitimate looking things. And so we got to kind of have that discussion about, fake news is not necessarily black or white. You know, things can be true but still misrepresented, and that can contribute to that. And then we actually had some homework assignments that we had designed that were engaging with the exhibit that I mentioned that talked about fake news. And so we had kind of multiple different points of engagement for students, which I think was really helpful. Almost every student that we surveyed afterwards said that they had felt that they learned something new and that they had enjoyed that session. And we think that a lot of that was, you know, the built-in discussion, the real-world application, and then the, you know, multiple different ways that they could interact with those materials after the session. Because we did have a research guide set up for that class where they could go back and view the materials if they missed the session.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I do have one question in the chat from Leanne, who says, I'm the graduate studies librarian at my large university, and I'm going to be surveying the grad students to see what they think they need to learn as advanced students. Have you asked students that type of question? And if you did, how did you go about doing so?
I have not yet asked that question. This presentation, I kind of was an informal like jumping off point for me. So I do intend to kind of take some of the things that I've talked about and turn it into a longer form research project. So my intention is to survey graduate students in similar ways. I also am going to be informally and formally interviewing my colleagues who work with graduate students, particularly those in that new department that I mentioned, and to kind of talk to them about their graduate student experiences anecdotally. And I've had good luck in the past with Qualtrics surveys, and so that's typically what I use to assess anything. So when I go about surveying graduate students, I will probably utilize that. And I think the tricky thing with that kind of project is going to be phrasing those questions in a way that doesn't make it sound like there's a right answer. So, you know, kind of in that piece of trying to tell graduate students, like, we don't have any expectations of you. We just genuinely want to know what you need. I think finding that language is going to be kind of a challenge, but I think that's going to be one of the more important parts of it.
She says, I'm also afraid that they want it all.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, yeah, sometimes it's hard to gauge. Susan asks, what type of survey did you say you used or would use?
I typically use Qualtrics, and it's something that I've used in the past, and they have great kind of tools that will allow you to say, like, hey, how accessible is this survey, and how, you know, easy is it to read on mobile. So that's just what I've used in the past.
I'd agree. I think it's a good tool. I've had to use it both for instruction feedback and for class assignments. So being on both ends of it, creating the surveys and implementing them have been pretty great. I think it's a step up from SurveyMonkey.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got time for any more questions if anyone has any. Okay, well, if you all think of something, feel free to reach out to Brooke with any questions that you have. And Brooke, I want to thank you again for presenting today. That was a wonderful presentation. The recording should be up on the YouTube page in a couple of days. Just want to make sure everything was recorded smoothly. And with that, I'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, thank you.